What makes
This is Blacklisted. I'm Chris Hill. Welcome to the show. Tom Vaughan, welcome to Blacklisted.
Thank you so much.
And I think a lot of writers, if we address the elephant in the room up front, sort of maybe see structure as stricture. And you come at it from a slightly different angle. You see infinite choice as maybe the thing that's paralyzing for writers.
Yeah, that to me is what freezes us up. Is too many choices. Like you've been to the grocery store before and you've seen, you've gone to like, hey, I need barbecue sauce. And here in Texas, you go to barbecue sauce and you've got 100 choices. You have no idea where to even start on that. But the nice thing about structure and what my approach is, or at least how I approach, and I think anyone who understands structure is you end up making very big decisions up front about what story you're trying to tell. What is the narrative spine to the piece? And as soon as you make those big choices up front, you make the smaller choices easier and easier. And then when you make those smaller choices, that makes the micro choices easier and easier. And so what it ends up doing is liberating you in the sense of as you have ideas and as you have different options of how you approach, you're able to very easily remove which of those options don't help you. Like which one does
Okay.
not help you tell your story, and you can get rid of it. Because God knows we'll get 100 notes, both from other people and for ourselves, just lying in bed, coming up with ideas. Maybe I should do that. Maybe I should do that.
Yeah.
But when you've got a really good understanding of structure, it helps you not overthink it. It helps you not think too much and put yourself in trouble in that, that paralysis by analysis sort of thing.
Yeah.
So,
And I've also heard you say that it's a toolkit that you can rely on as a professional because some days the muse does not show up.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's just understanding the craft. And that's, he's just even beyond structure, just understanding the craft of characterization and understanding scene work, understanding narrative momentum, understanding how to evoke emotion. The two main benefits to this, the two main benefits of understanding this craft is the consistency it offers you. Like that's number one, is it gives you a certain consistency in your work. I know I've been doing this almost 30 years now. I know some of my scripts are going to be better than others. That's just the way it's going to be. But I also know because I'm a pro and I understand this that there's a floor to like
Sure.
there's a consistent quality. I'm going to deliver a certain level. And when I'm hired by a producer, when I come on an assignment, their expectation is at the bare minimum I'm going to deliver at a certain professional level. And you can't do that on a consistent basis over, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years without understanding the craft of what we do. And then the other great benefit to understanding the craft is when you do write and things aren't working, you have these tools to figure out why. Because like anyone can sit down and write, and if it works great, everyone thinks they're a genius, right? Like that's fantastic. Everything worked fine. There's no need to really spend that much time on it for whatever reason this script worked. And I've had those. I've
Sure.
had those where
Yeah.
just everything just kind of seemed to fall in place. And if you can do that every time, more power to you. I've never met anyone who could, but if you can do it every time, that's great. But if you come in and you write and something isn't working, the first act isn't working, or like the second half isn't working, or the scene, like if you don't have the knowledge of craft to be able to figure out how to fix it, you're
Mm.
stuck with whatever place you were when you started. Like you're not going to solve these problems using the exact same thing that got you into the problem to begin with. I for one, am mostly craft based. I'm a good writer. I've been doing this a long time, and it's by no means a knock on my writing. I know my personality, what I bring to the table. I know the way that I see the world is unique. The stories I want to tell are unique, and so I don't have any insecurity about my writing in the slightest. But I also know that I'm not the most talented writer in the room. And my teacher was Edward Albee. Edward Albee, he won 3 Pulitzer Prizes for drama. Up until the day he died, was the greatest living American playwright. And probably between him, Tennessee Williams, and Arthur Miller would be like the only 3 you would discuss of the greatest American
Wow.
playwrights.
Yeah.
And Edward was all talent. Edward was all talent. The way he saw the world was unique. The way he interpreted the world was unique. The way he understood people was unique. His innate sense of story and structure was unique. He was just a genius. The downside to that is that Edward was not a great teacher.
Sure. Yeah.
Because he could not teach what made him so special. He couldn't do it. And his greatest gift to me as a student of his was confidence, of like him getting behind me and supporting me and giving me the confidence that I could do this.
Sure. Yeah.
Was his greatest gift. And I'll be grateful for that until the day I die. But as a raw teacher, just teaching process and teaching craft, it just wasn't his specialty. My acting teacher, Jose Quintero, who was another titan of American theater, he was an acting teacher. And I learned more about writing and playwriting and screenwriting from Jose than I did Edward, or really anyone else. I often joke the greatest screenwriting class I ever took was my acting class with Jose Quintero. but because I wasn't nearly as talented as Edward, I had to learn this craft. I had to, break down movies over years. I had to analyze scripts. I had to analyze structures. I had to build a process. And I don't think I really understood that process until maybe 6 or 7 years as a professional.
Yeah.
I was still very inconsistent
So
through those
those
years.
first few years running on instinct, almost running on sort of.
Oh yeah, yeah. Which is how I sold my first script.
Yeah.
Yeah, you sell that first script out of instinct, and then you write the next one, and then your agent's like, "Well, what the hell is this?"
Sure.
Because you're just trying to. I was like, but I did the same thing I did the last time, and it just didn't work. And then I don't think I really had a process that was functional until I started teaching.
Okay.
And because at that point you had to start explaining your own process to other people. And you had to start, well, this is why we do this. And you had never verbalized it before. You'd always known, like, when this happens, you do this. You just instinctively did it.
Yeah.
But now you've got to explain to someone why this is the better choice. Why is the inciting incident there? Well, because we're all told it's there. Yeah, but why is it there? Like, what's the benefit to it?
Yeah.
Because you don't really understand any of this until you know the why.
Yeah. Okay.
Because until you know the why behind it, it's just like a thing you're supposed to do, but you don't know when you should do it or when you shouldn't do it, when you can skip it, when you can undermine it, when you can surprise, because you don't know the why behind it. But once you understand the why behind something, then you know when it's going to be useful for you. You know when it's not going to be useful for you. You know when you can undermine that expectation and when you need to embrace that expectation. The why behind everything. Like I say a lot of rules are what people who don't understand the why call principles. Like that's.
Yeah, there's a brilliant book that I really love by John York. It's called Into the Woods, and he does go into the kind of why of 3-act structure and this idea that all human thought really can be sort of broken down that way, or sort of human progress. This kind of, you have a thesis about the world, you sort of test it out there with the antithesis, and then somehow there's a synthesis of those two ideas that becomes this third thing, that the two parents create the child almost. And that's how all human thought's being
Oh, wow.
created. So this idea of three-act structure seems to be sort of fundamental to humans, I guess, in some ways.
Yeah, I have not read that book, but I've heard nothing but very good things about it, and I'm probably well overdue to read it.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. And so you, after being a practitioner for maybe 20 years, you got your master's in screenwriting so you could teach at your alma mater, University of
Yeah.
Houston. And now you've put these ideas into a course, or a couple of courses at least, that other people outside the sort of campus can access. These two courses, Mastering Structure and Idea to Outline, and they come under the branding of story and plot. So maybe let's start there. Maybe let's start by defining terms. What is story and what is plot? Because I think for writers who are maybe beginning, that those two things can be slightly evanescent or sort of interchangeable, but they're not.
Yeah, no, they're not. As I explained to my students, like I have created these definitions for myself,
Yeah,
and I am not an academic, so it is of no interest to me to make these definitions so I could classify things. That
sure.
doesn't help me. My interest in these definitions is, how do I make my job easier? How do I make this difficult job a little easier and create a process that when I get stuck, when I am challenged by something, I have a process to fall back on that I know works, it gives me consistency, and also liberates me at the same time, so I can really spend my mental energy on what's genuinely important to help me tell my story. So I define story as the transformational journey of a human being. And that is the reason why we are telling this thing. Like, this is why we are sharing it. The whole point of it is the story itself. That story is change. I think it's comparable to a mission statement. It is the mission statement of your screenplay to tell this story about this transformation. And the transformation, there's three types of transformation. There's the first type of transformation, and this is the most common, where a character changes for the better. And that character may change just a little bit, or they can do a whole 180. They can be a bad person and become a good person. And all those variations in between will fall under that category. And then the second type of transformation is when a character remains steadfast to a core idea, a central belief that they are challenged on, but remain steadfast to it. And in doing so, transform those around them.
Okay.
So Disney does a great job with the Disney princess movies, are usually that second one, where like Moana believes in herself. She knows that she's capable of more,
Yeah.
but the village is saying, no, like, you need to do exactly what you're told to do and be your part. And she goes out and she proves herself, and she changes those around her. My favorite Disney princess movie is probably Prey, which is the bloodiest princess
The 20th
Disney
century,
princess
I guess,
movie.
is Disney by
Yeah,
proxy. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it is a young woman who believes in herself and believes that there's a greater danger out there. No one believes in her. They think she should just do the role that she normally does. Her best friend's a dog. This is very Disney princess stuff. And then at the end, she conquers the creature and returns back to the village and transforms those in the village about who she is. Ratatouille is another one of my favorites. That is Remy the rat has a crisis of confidence, but ultimately remains steadfast to his belief and changes everyone around him. Changes his dad, changes Ego the chef, changes Linguini, changes Colette.
Yeah.
Those are really, really fun stories. And then the third type of story is a tragedy, where a character changes too late, changes for the worse, or fails to change at all. But in all three versions, all three types of stories, the change or the lack of the change is the point.
Sure.
It is what makes it an optimistic story or a tragic story. Um, Michael Corleone at the end of Godfather 2. It's a tragedy because he changes for the worse. He is now his father. And he promised Kay at the beginning that that was his family and it wasn't him. And it turns out, it was him as well. So his transformation is for the worse and therefore a tragedy.
Yeah, and so plot then, to distinguish it from story, is the events of, well, maybe you should say it better, but are they the events
Yeah,
of telling the story for the audience, in
that
presenting
bring
it to the
about that
audience?
change.
Okay.
Yeah, the plot is simply the events that bring about that change. And once you make a decision about what story you want to tell, the plot then becomes negotiable. Because some things, some events are going to help you tell that story better than others. But everything is in support of that story. Uh, the events in the narrative support that story. The supporting characters, the relationships, the subplots, everything is in support of that singular story. And sure, like there are ensemble films where they are unified somewhat by theme,
Like
and
Crash maybe is an example of that.
yeah, like
Yeah,
Crash.
yeah.
But each one of those subplots is about how that character changes or fails to change or changes other people. But for the most part, with a singular protagonist or say a two-hander where sometimes the story is about the relationship itself and how does that relationship change, that could be the central narrative to a two-hander as well. But in all
Mm.
these cases, it's about transformation. And that transformation can be small, it can be great. Now, for an audience like Indiana Jones, Raiders of the Lost Ark, we're there for the action scenes, we're there for the adventure, we're there to see Nazis and their faces melt, right? Like that's why we're
The
there.
external goal, as others would call
Yes,
it.
and it's
Yeah,
fun.
yeah.
It's that script somehow seems to get better and better over time, which I think is like a miraculous feat. And but there there is an ending to Raiders of the Lost Ark that moves us, that there is an emotional catharsis as we see that relationship healed, as we see Indiana Jones switch from I only care about the ark
Mm.
to I care more about the girl. And that gives us an emotional pull that other adventure movies during that time didn't give us. And it's why we don't remember those movies as well. It's why Die Hard, stands taller than most of the other '80s action movies, is because of that transformation and that emotional pull. Even though when we watch the movie, like we don't walk out of that and go, "Oh my God, the way he changed his relationship with his wife is so amazing." Like we're talking about Hans Gruber, we're talking about but that emotional connection, that thing that allows us to experience that catharsis, that's what separates those great movies from, say, a B movie that we watch and we go, oh, that was fun, but we never think about again.
Yeah, I think it's a really helpful thing because writers tend to maybe think about story and character arc as two separate entities, and that the character arc is almost tacked on, as you've said before, onto
Oh
the
my God,
story.
yeah.
So you feel like they're almost this sedimentary layers of rock that are sort of put on
It's
top
why,
of each
yeah,
other.
it's why I define it as such. It is you hit the nail on the head. It is why I define the story based on the transformation because the biggest mistake most people make is they try to tack on an arc and they have the plot. We're going to plot this thing out. We're going to have all these great scenes. And they go, oh, no, we need an arc now. And then they will try to add this arc layer to it and then wonder why no one's moved by it. Why there's no emotional reaction to the plot is because it's tacked on, it's separate. But it's built into needs to be built into the DNA. Like even an action scene
Mm.
of how does that action scene affect that character? How does that affect their choices? How does that affect how they see themselves, how they see the world? Does it push them towards where they're going to end up? Does it push them back to where they were or does it divert them? Everything down to how does it affect the story? And that's when you build something that feels like one unified story. Because at the end of it all we're really trying to do is evoke emotion. That's all we're really trying to do. Like that's our transaction with the audience is they give us money and we evoke emotion from them. And that almost all entertainment is that's sports, football and basketball. That is a roller coaster. That is, that is
Sure. Yeah.
music. I
Yeah.
will give you money and you will make me feel something. And if we feel satisfied by that emotion and it gives us this emotional catharsis of whatever brand that is, then we feel like it was money well spent. And if it fails to do it, we feel like we got ripped off.
Yeah. There's another thing I think writers feel like is almost operating in a separate orbit in the way that character arcs are sometimes viewed, and that's theme. So Michael Arndt does talk about sort of three different types of stakes, and Michael Arndt being the writer of Toy Story 3 and Little Miss Sunshine, he has some fantastic videos I'm sure people have checked out or should check out. But in those videos, they're almost instructional videos. He does talk about sort of the internal stakes and the external stakes, but then he separates the theme really into this philosophical stakes, which is where
philosophical stakes,
which is kind of where the thematic argument he argues is within the story. But you have maybe a different idea that's maybe even simpler than that, which allows us to feel like they're all part of the same thing.
Yeah, there is a line of thinking about the thematic argument, and as with everything, you go with what works for you. Like whatever you connect with, whatever makes it easier for you. If you hear something from someone that resonates with you, embrace it, go with it. So there's by no means a sense of this is the right way and this is the wrong way. And as Michael Arndt, is just a natural teacher. Not only is he a brilliant writer, he's a natural teacher. And so his videos are always worth spending time with and listening and watching and frankly taking notes.
Yeah.
But he does talk about I don't know if he calls them internal or emotional, but the physical, emotional, and the philosophical states.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
And
yeah,
I think that's what it is. And if it's not exactly that, it's synonyms of that.
sure.
So, but I find over teaching a lot of years and also just my many attempts to do it myself that I have found theme as a minefield of trouble
Sure.
for most writers. And
amorphous, even it feels like this thing you can't pin down.
it's just so, and it doesn't have to be. And it's actually really quite simple. And when I figured this out, it was one of those huge sighs of relief when I went, oh God, because I can simplify this, which is really all you want to do is like, how do we simplify? How do we make this job easier? How do we make our choices easier? Because we're creative people, for whatever reason, we're always trying to complicate it. We're always trying to find nuance. We're always trying to find, yes, it's true, but this at the same time.
Okay.
And it's very hard to make choices when we're trying to say, but three things are true at the same time.
We are sort of those type A, trying to please people, teachers' pets who want to show how clever we are sometimes, I guess. Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. And so for me, of how I defined theme is it's simply just the ideas and values that are rewarded or punished within the context of the story. And so as you define your story, just going back to the story is everything, define your story. You are either telling a story or you are trying to find the story. And you want to find the story as fast as you can so you can tell the story. And the fastest way to find the story is to just decide what story you are telling. You don't have to wait to find it. Decide upon it of what moves you, what interests you, what compels you. Again, going back to that idea of what makes all of us unique are those things of how we see the world, of how we emotionally react to something. What do we find scary? What do we find fills us with anxiety? What fills us with hope and lust and love?
Or what is positive change? I guess people's understanding of what positive change could be different as well.
Yeah. So if we look at that story and we look at this character who starts this way and they end this way, we make this decision, this is the story we are going to tell, then we look at what values and what ideas are rewarded or punished. And uh, is it being open and being honest with your feelings that is rewarded, right? That could also be the thing that punishes you, and it could be a tragedy. Like that could end up being like, look what happens when you expose yourself. You get crushed, and then that becomes the tragedy of you observing this thing, and those become the themes of just simply looking at what are the things that are uh, punished or rewarded within this transformation. And when you do that, it ends up screaming to you what your theme is. Like that's your theme. When certain things are rewarded and certain things are punished, that is announced, the theme is announcing itself to you. And so you don't have to spend that much time of like, hey, what's my theme here? It's really already there.
Mm.
You just have to observe it. You have to see it. And then once you do, you can highlight it. You can, explore it more. But like if you pick any movie that, you know, that we love, you can identify what are the values, what are the principles and ideas that are rewarded or punished, and that will tell you what it is. And with Arndt, with Michael Arndt, like when he talks about Star Wars, he talks about the philosophical stakes of um, technology versus faith. And when Luke Skywalker makes the decision to turn off the targeting computer, he is answering the resolution to the philosophical stakes. And so you have the external stakes, which is destroying the Death Star, the internal stakes, and then the philosophical stakes. And I think the danger for me, I have found for my writing, is that when I see the philosophical stakes, or what I call the spiritual question, uh, if I see those as something separate, then I can end up trying to tie myself into knots, trying to get it all to work. But when I recognize that the spiritual stakes or the philosophical stakes are really just the transformation of the character. And so the thematic argument of which, and the thematic argument is simply the theme stated as a thesis, right? So it's just a thesis of faith is stronger than technology. Uh, that's Luke Skywalker's journey of he turns towards becoming a Jedi. That's his first big step to becoming a Jedi. And the values and ideas that are rewarded with that transformation is that faith is stronger than technology. And so just by defining his transformation and seeing the themes that are presented within that transformation, that's telling us the theme. We don't have to deal with the theme as a third separate thing. It is in the DNA of the transformation. And so you end up having this thematic argument, which is simply the transformation of the character. And the transformation is the thematic argument, and the thematic argument is the transformation. They're one and the same. Um, but if you try to start with theme, it I say it a lot of like stories have themes. Themes do not have stories.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
starting out with theme and then trying to find a story with it is just making your job 100 times more difficult than it already needs to be. And find the story and let that tell you what the theme is.
Because now I think about it, Luke does start in this place. He might be this farm boy from Tatooine, but he's not really. He's the guy fixing the droids. He's into the tech. He's doing fixing the speeder. His uncle tells him to go fix this other machine. So he is very much the tech boy, and then
Yeah, and he
becomes,
fantasizes about flying. Like he's got
yeah,
that little model, and like that's what he wants to do is like be a pilot.
yes, yeah. So there's definitely, if we go back to our story, that is the transformational change towards faith, that he starts one
Yeah.
place, ends in another.
And through the whole story, it's Darth Vader talking about his old religion and the other general talking about this is the greatest technology
The
in the
Death Star,
galaxy.
right? This
Yeah.
this incredible piece of tech. Yes. No, that's great. So let's go to 3-act structure. 3-act structure is something that maybe even my 8-year-old understands, at least
Sure.
in an instinctive way of beginning, middle, and end. We tend to, maybe in the post Sid Field era of the 80s, we talk about the 3-act structure in screenwriting. Maybe some people who are listening to this or watching will sort of know that sometimes Act 2, which is roughly 50% of the screenplay, will be sort of seesawed on the midpoint and create 2 equal parts. So we have a 2A and a 2B. So then we have 4 parts of the screenplay that are roughly 25% each, not to make it too mathematical. But then you have a different way of approaching that, which is instead of having 4 parts, we actually have 8 sequences. So maybe let's touch on that, because that was something that, again, one of those light bulb things of taking your courses that I was really struck by and interested in and have taken on.
Yeah, I one of the biggest moments for me before I was doing this professionally was the power of the midpoint. And because I was Sid Field, that was the book that I had read was Sid Field's first book, and he
Yeah.
barely mentions the midpoint at all in the first book. He mentions it a little later in the second book, but that's all I
The
had was
workbook.
Screenplay by Sid
Yeah.
Field. And from there, I just started watching movies and breaking down their structures. I had a friend who owned a video store, and they closed at like 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock, and I would go there 15 minutes before closing, and I was allowed to rent anything for free because no one had rented it out that night.
Oh, nice.
So,
Yeah.
so I was able to, and I would take 3 or 4 movies home and just all night break down the structures, like look at what was working, what wasn't. And at some point, I think it was Sid Field's second book I read, or maybe it was Michael Hodge, but at some point someone mentioned the midpoint.
He had a second
And then
book that was called The Workbook, the Screenwriter's Workbook or something, or yeah.
something, yeah. I can't remember. I was talking to another pro writer last night, and she was still talking. She rereads Sid Field before she starts every project, which I thought was really interesting. I was like, I got to reread Sid,
Yeah.
because that's back then. That's all you had in the early
84, I
90s.
think it was published in 84, maybe. I think, yeah.
Yeah, and I switched to screenwriting from playwriting. I think probably in 93 or 94. And so like that's all you had. Save the
Vogler's
cat.
memo might have
He
been
was
around.
nowhere.
Was
Yeah.
Vogler's memo out there in Disney, maybe?
I
Yeah.
I think they had just started talking about the hero's journey a little bit, but it
Okay.
had not hit critical mass yet, at
Yeah.
least that I can
No,
think
it was, I think it was internal at that point with Lion King and things. Yeah. Yeah.
of. Yeah. And so I started looking at all these movies that I loved and looking at the midpoints, and would see how strong the midpoint was. And so the next script I wrote, I was like, I'm going to build this structure out with 4 acts instead of 3. And it went so much smoother. It was so much more fun. I felt so much better about the script, and that was ended up being the first script that I sold. That was a script that got me my agent at CAA, and
Amazing.
I moved to Los Angeles after that, and then when I started teaching, I started teaching, I think in 2002, 2003, in that general area. We definitely noticed that I was also breaking down uh, Act 2A and 2B into 2 parts each. And we didn't have a name for it then. We called it the waypoint. I think one of my students, John Connor, said, "Is it a waypoint?" And we were like, "Yeah, sure, we'll call it a waypoint." And that
Yeah.
became like, and so you had the inciting incident, which divided Act 1, and then you had the setback, which divided Act 3.
Okay.
But we didn't divide 2A and 2B that way. But we started to figure out, because we would be breaking movies down and like, well, there it is. There's a very clear shift and very clear. And so we ended up years later just labeling them the 8 sequences: sequence 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. And then I found out that Columbia had been teaching a version of the 8 sequences themselves. There's a Czechoslovakian filmmaker, and I wish I could give him credit. but I think he's most noted for popularizing the 8 sequences.
Right.
And then
Okay.
one of his students wrote the sequent approach. And I hate that I feel terrible I can't remember their names because they deserve to have their names mentioned. Um, and so they were developing it and teaching it, and then we were teaching it like our version of it.
Yeah.
And uh, they named the 8 sequences A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and H. Because I think it made it less complicated with acts 1, 2, 3, and
Makes
4.
sense to some.
Yeah, like that makes sense. But like I would never because I would never remember like which sequence is G. I'd have to count them out every time.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
for whatever, like that's sequence 7. All right, that's like
Yeah.
So we did, and then um, I hit a. I remember I hit a real block around 2011 where I just could not break a story, and it was really frustrating. I've been doing this for at that point 16 years, professionally, with only I think 2 years off, and probably the hardest time I've ever had as creatively as a writer. I just could not break this story, and I was starting to overthink it, and really really starting to be my own enemy, which tends to be fairly common amongst us. And the way I got out of it is I just went back to what I was teaching my students. I just went back to all the sheets that I had. I went back to my own lectures. I went back to, and then I started to kind of formalize all of that teaching into a systemized process. And that's what got me out of that trouble, and then we ended up selling that script later on.
Oh, amazing.
And uh I think a few years after that is I was always teaching live and in person, and I was teaching in LA, mostly within the improv community, which I I still hold dear and consider my community. But when I moved back to Texas, I knew I wanted to teach at U of H. That was the whole point. And then during the pandemic, I taught online because I didn't know what to expect. I just did some free courses online, it was like pay what you can, some courses, and
Okay.
they went great. Like we had like hundreds of people coming in, and it was really really effective. And that's when I decided to create the digital courses. I was like, okay, this is a much more effective medium than I thought to teach these lectures and to teach these courses. And so that's when I started to just, take those courses that I've always been teaching and I put them on video and put them into separate, I think 55 separate videos for each course, something along those lines to teach these sequences. And we have new writers, we have total beginners. I've got students who have been TV writers for 30 years taking these courses, showrunners for some of the biggest shows out there, or at least executive producers to some of the biggest TV shows out there. And, um, people really seem to enjoy them and get a lot out of them. And it's such an effective way to do it because everything's in a small video. It's like a 3 or 4 minute video of a very specific lesson. So if you have trouble later on and you have a sticking point, or you're going through act 1, or you're going through the 6th sequence or the 5th sequence, you can always go right back to that video, rewatch it, read the text, go through some of the articles I've written. It's always there and accessible. So it's just kind of a coach that's with you, you know, forever whenever you need it.
Yeah, I find I've taken both courses, mastering structure and idea to outline. I took them the other way around, and I sort of went back to mastering structure because you touched on a few of those ideas of the structure that I then went back because I was really curious. And since then, they've really sort of helped in my sort of professional toolkit and sort of working on scripts and projects and assignments. And those who are watching and listening, if the ideas that Tom and I have been discussing are of interest, or you want to sort of pursue further, we have a website set up. We have storyandplot.com/blacklisted. And there, if you sign up, initially you can sign up for this free free screenwriting lesson every week that arrives in your inbox every Tuesday morning. And I personally, I kind of like look forward to those and read them avidly. But tell us what else there is there. There's also the opportunity to sign up for a free email course, I believe.
Yeah, if you're a beginner, and of course I've been doing this a long time, so my idea of a beginner is the first 3 or 4 screenplays.
Yeah.
So, like if you've never written a word or you're in those early stages, there's a free email course of screenwriting for beginners, which totally free. It's 11 emails, just breaking down the foundation. And the goal of that course was always to what is the quickest and most efficient way to get good at this? Because you can't teach screenwriting in 11 emails, like you
Yes. Yeah.
can't do it. But you can teach, here's the approach that you can take. Here's the system that you can take that will get you there as quickly as possible. Because I was mostly self-taught. And there's so many things that I wish I had known where it didn't have to take me as long as it did to kind of figure this out. And so that course is really like, what are the things that I wish I had known when I first decided to pursue this? What would have helped me get to where I wanted to be faster? And that's what that course is.
And beyond that, you can take these courses that we've discussed and that I've taken, and there's a 10% off, I think, coupon that you get by signing up to the website. So that's storyandplot.com/blacklisted. But we're going to touch on a few more ideas from these courses before we go away. So maybe the next thing I would like to discuss that I thought is really an interesting key thing that I took away was this idea of the sacrifice and also the realization. They seem to be two things that maybe haven't been covered in screenwriting books and manuals, and they feel like a massive sort of omission. So maybe let's touch lightly on those. And again, if you're more curious, please pursue the courses. But the realization and the sacrifice.
I agree. I'm really stunned how the sacrifice is not covered in most screenwriting. Like it is one of the most important, meaningful moments. And if you do it right, if you do the sacrifice right, it should be one of, if not the most emotionally satisfying moment in your story. And the idea behind the sacrifice, and that's just what I call it. And I'm not the only person who talks about it. I know there's other people who talk about like uh, they have other terms for it. It's just not talked about enough, considering how vital it is.
I feel like
And
when you think about Save the Cat and things, Act 3 is almost like a sort of almost a little bit like a throwaway. It's not really quite discussed. It feels like a rundown to the end, but this really helped me sort of figure out how you structure Act 3.
tend to agree. Like they do kind of give the third act short shrift, and it's so vital too because such a great starting point for your story is how you want the audience to feel at the end of like what emotion do you want them to have at the end of this story. And if you know what that is, it becomes like such a huge guiding light for you. It's such a clear, true north for the whole process of like, this is what you're building towards. And this is a lot of what I mean by like having the transformation in the DNA of the structure. Because like for me, all structure is what the audience knows and when they know it in order to maximize narrative momentum and emotional resonance. That's all structure is. Like, what does the audience know and when they know it? And this is true for TV. It's true for novels. It's true for music. I mean, the structure of music is one note after another, and you put those notes in a particular order, you have a different experience for the audience. And every scene's a note, every moment's a note, and you put those scenes and moments in a certain order, and you maximize in that order, you maximize narrative momentum and emotional resonance. And narrative momentum is the dramatic question. Like that's going to be the main driver of narrative momentum is the dramatic question. The main driver of emotional resonance is the story. What is the transformation of this character? And we define characters by the choices they make. That's how you define a character. of what do they want and what are they willing to do to get it. And one of my favorite examples, just going back to Raiders of the Lost Ark, because I'm an old guy and I love that movie so much. But at the near the midpoint of the movie, Indiana Jones discovers Marion's alive, and she's tied up and she's got a gag in her mouth, and he's delighted to see her. And she, of course, is like, "Get me out of here." And then he realizes he can't rescue her, because if he rescues her, they're going to know, the Nazis are going to know that he's there and he's about to find the Ark. And so he puts the gag back in her mouth and leaves her there. And he makes this choice in that moment that the Ark is more important to him than Marion. That's his choice. And it's strangely charming in that moment, because we know how determined he is to find the Ark, but out of context, it's a horrible choice. It's a terrible, like, we should hate this guy, but they managed to kind of make it kind of charming and fun. But then later on in the movie, the Nazis have the Ark and they have Marion, and he's got the bazooka, and he tells them, "I don't care about the Ark, I just want the girl." And that becomes this very clear distinction of how he has changed. And at the end, he's got this moment. He's been after this thing the entire time, after this Ark. And at the last moment, he cares more about Marion, and he's not willing to take a chance to see what the Ark looks like. And he says, "Marion, close your eyes." And because they close their eyes, they make that choice. And of course, Belloc doesn't close his eyes. He makes that choice. He dies. Belloc dies, and Indiana Jones lives. But through that whole movie, Belloc and Indiana Jones want the same thing. They both want the Ark. They both want Marion. And Indiana Jones changes, and Belloc doesn't. And Belloc dies, and Indiana Jones lives. And he gets this relationship with Marion. And so that last moment when he makes that final choice of, "I've spent this entire movie to look inside this Ark, but in this moment, my opportunity to do it, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to close my eyes instead," because he has gained a certain amount of respect for the Ark and for spirituality. But more important, I believe, he's not willing to take the chance for Marion. He's just not willing to take the chance. He could be wrong. He's not taking the chance because she's that much more important to him. That I refer to as the sacrifice, which is the choice that a character makes at the end of the movie that solidifies their transformation, because they would not have made that choice in Act One. And if we define our characters by the choices they make, and I believe that we do, of like, what does this character want? What are they willing to do to get it? If you want to define a character early in a movie, give them a choice. Give them a hard moral choice, and you will define that character for the audience. And then you essentially map out this character's journey by the choices they make given circumstances. And so I always say, if like you want to describe a character more, don't describe them more, give them more choices. That will define the character more for the audience of just giving them more and more choices. So
character is action, that idea or
character is
principle.
action. Yeah, character is action. And so when you look at the movies that you love, you will consistently see the sacrifice. You will consistently see that choice that character makes, because no one, like at the end of the movie, we don't want to have someone go, "Oh, he's changed. Take my word for it." You know, it's not moving. Like, nobody cares. We need to see an action. We need to see a choice. Like, what choice do they make at the end of the movie that they would never have made in Act One? And the best ones, the best, most satisfying sacrifices are the sacrifices that are required to answer the dramatic question. So the reason why Star Wars is so satisfying is because the very thing that defeats the Death Star is Luke Skywalker's sacrifice. Like that's what we want. And it's why it's the same thing of why a relationship that is a reward for conquering is not as satisfying as a relationship that changes a character and allows them to have the achievement. That's a satisfying relationship. But like the relationship as a prize at the end doesn't move us in the slightest. You know, that's making that transformation essential to the physical narrative is what will make that transformation even more emotionally saccharine, because it makes everything, you needed this to do this, and then to do this you needed to do this. It gives it what I call that thematic unification. You are telling one singular story rather than three separate stories that kind of end at the same time.
Yeah. And so the realization that happens somewhere near the end of Act Two, maybe generally before the crisis that sort of leads us into Act Three, is that moment in therapy when you almost recognize there's a problem. It's not the
That's a
action.
great comparison. Yeah.
It's not the action that you've taken to correct any behavioral problems. It's maybe recognizing the problem.
Yeah, it is that realization of who they want to be, and the realization that their old values are no longer aligned with the person that they want to be. But they haven't owned it yet. Like they haven't been sacrificed, like haven't made the sacrifice yet. Like you don't own anything until you pay for it. And the realization is just simply, hey, this is true. I don't want to be this person anymore. But it's just talk. It's good talk. It's a necessary talk, but they have not paid the price for it. And we need to see that, because that's the turning point for the character. That's when they change. And like I know Blake Snyder talks a lot about the all is lost moment. And I think that's helpful. Like, I don't think that's a bad thing at all. I think a lot of those moments are all is lost. But what's really important to me is not hitting a low point, is that it's an event that changes the direction of the character. And to me, what's important there, again, just going by how I define structure about narrative momentum and emotional resonance, I know that that sixth sequence is going to have a certain narrative momentum, and the character's change is going to drive that momentum. So whether that change comes from a low point or a not so low point is not particularly interesting to me, as long as it changes the direction of the character and as long as we get narrative momentum out of that change.
That creates the drive into Act Three, as it were. That's the kind of propulsion. One more thing on mastering structure was to sort of this topical area of scenes, not information. Sometimes when I'm outlining a project, I can find that I've overstuffed the pudding, and when it comes to writing the script, it can be run 20 pages too long. And I think you're always looking at that page count in the corner. That's the kind of measurement of whether you're succeeding or whether your family's environment is going to be a nice or hostile place to be in. But what do you mean by that, by scenes, not information? And how do you prevent yourself from overstuffing an outline in that regard?
Yeah, it is. I know for me, it comes from Sid Field, because he would have that diagram and he'd have that little line in the diagram that says midpoint. And it is literally just a point in the line.
Okay.
And so that's when you start thinking of, but the reality is that if you've got that diagram, that midpoint is not a single point. It's a big chunk of time. Like and so when we're mapping it out, we'll go like, oh, here's the midpoint, here's the break into Act One. And what happens is that we forget that break out of Act One is actually a huge scene. And so it should take up, a good chunk of that line. Yet when we start listing things out, we start listing information, and we forget that each of those things are a big, huge scene. And so we get into the habit early on that we need more plot. But in reality, all we want is great scenes. And so it becomes like, yes, that needs to happen in this scene, but what's the great scene that it's in? So yes, this moment, he needs to find out that he's the one who took, like, say, an amnesia story. I'm the one who took the money, right? Like, he needs to find that out. That's the information. That's the change within the scene. Or they find out someone they trusted was the bad guy. right? There's the betrayal. They find out the information that, one of my favorite scenes is in Total Recall. And I've been trying to recapture the emotion of this through my entire career. Was the first time I saw Total Recall when Schwarzenegger is shown the video of himself and he finds out that he's the bad guy. And he did this whole thing. And it's such a mind-blowing twist. And I saw that in high school and I was so blown away by it, where he realizes, oh, I'm a fake memory implanted on the bad guy who was doing all this. And now I'm going to disappear. It is such a great moment. Now, the information is you're the bad guy. Like, that's it. But the scene that it takes place in is a longer scene. And that's actually kind of an exposition heavy scene.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
the
sure.
emotional impact of it is what's important. Of how are you going to make a great scene out of this? And we tend to think in terms of plot. But in my mind, at its most simple, great screenwriting is great characters, great scenes, and the order by which we put them. That's it. Like, it's not plot, it's not information. Like it is great scenes. And the only thing that's valuable about information is the emotion it evokes. So, like, whenever you get yourself in trouble and like you're challenged with whatever you're working on, for whatever reason, early on in our careers, we tend to think more plot will save us.
Okay. Yeah.
And it won't. It just makes things worse. What we want is more emotion. What we want are characters that care more. The only thing that makes a plot more valuable is if it creates an emotional reaction from the audience and from the characters. And so 9 times out of 10, because we're all storytellers and we're like 9 times out of 10, there's emotion in those scenes that we have not pulled out yet and that we've abandoned because we're putting so much more effort into putting more information in scenes that we're leaving emotion on the table of what that scene is about. And if we just take our time with that scene and pull the emotion that we've probably already built in there, we don't need to add more plot. More plot's just going to weigh us down.
Okay. No, that's very well said. One thing we haven't touched on, because we've talked about structure and story, but I think you put a lot of onus, and the industry puts a lot of onus on the idea itself. It's an industry of ideas. And I think you said that the 2 things that make a project sell, or 3 things, one, I guess, is timing, right place, right time. But maybe the other 2 is the concept or the logline and then the execution of that logline. So
yeah,
maybe let's talk briefly, very briefly, about what is a good idea and how do we sort of distill ideas.
Yeah. I over enough decades doing this, I'm thoroughly convinced that the log line, and more specifically the concept in the log line and how you execute that log line, are like 90% of a screenplay sale. And so
Which is
makes a great...
such a hard thing to comprehend as a new writer, really because you're like, I've written 100 pages, but you're saying that the 25 words or less that I can distill it to is 90% importance.
Yeah. I can give you a pretty accurate judge of your chances of whether you're going to sell a script based on the log line.
I'm completely bought, but I think it's a hard concept for people to understand because, but that log line, that essentially that distillation, that product description, for a better term, is the thing that will propel your project through the town. It's the thing that will communicate the idea.
And there's still wiggle room for a great script at the right time to the right person. So like that's not irrelevant. It's just you, without that great concept, without that great log line. And again, the only thing that makes the log line great is the concept inside the log line. People tend to worry about the structure of the log line and the wording of the log line. Like you can fix all of that. The thing that's really important is the concept in the log line.
Yeah.
And that's going to drive everything. And if you don't have a great concept, you are relying solely on amazing execution, which is very tough, and it finding the right person at the right time, which can happen. And I've done it. Like I've had less than great log lines that found themselves the right person at the right time. That can definitely happen. It just doesn't give you the best chance. So like my feeling is like if you don't have a great concept to your screenplay, you probably shouldn't complain when it doesn't sell, because chances were it was never going to sell. Like that's just it. Now, if you have a great screenplay that you love and you just wanted to tell this story, and I've written those, that's fine too. Like, hey, I knew it wasn't a great shot, but I love this story. And sooner or later, it's going to find itself to the right person and the right desk at the right time. And I just got to get it out there and hope that happens sooner rather than later. That is a perfectly acceptable strategy.
That period political drama, that historical drama. Yeah, sure.
Like one of my scripts that I absolutely love is an 80s piece about two kids who steal a car. Like that's a very tough script to sell. I love that script. And so I've just got to wait for the right time and the right place and the right person. And eventually, hopefully it will happen. But if I have a script like I want to sell this script, and the only way to judge success for this script is whether I sell it or not, then I'm going to have to really demand a great concept. And a great concept there's a lot to it, but the most important thing about a concept is that it promises great scenes. Like it should be a unique idea that is repeatable, that can be explored within the story, that promises great scenes, because you cannot pitch a whole movie in a log line. You can't do it, but you can promise great scenes. You can pitch the promise of a movie in the log line. So like a great concept, I mean, I think A Quiet Place is one of the great obvious concepts, which is it's a horror movie. And if you make noise, monsters will kill you. Like and so that's a repeatable idea. Like how many variations of tension and horror can you create by human beings trying to live in total and complete silence? And so every fun moment in that movie is some variation of if you make noise, monsters will kill you. And like horror movies are great for concept for that very reason, because the stakes are so high. You have this very clear game you can play. Jurassic Park was we brought back dinosaurs. That's it.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's very specific scenes. It's almost like specific, fresh scenes that we've never seen before that the concept spills out into our head. It's
yeah. And so someone hears this idea, they have an emotional reaction to it. They go, "Oh, that sounds scary," or "That's hilarious," or "Oh my God, that's so heartbreaking." Like they have an emotional reaction, and they can envision, even though you haven't pitched a single scene to them, they can envision possibilities of scenes.
Yeah.
And that gets them excited. And this is like the key idea that most people forget, is that you are not the only one who needs to sell this script. So like if you give it to your agent's got to pitch it to somebody. And that person has to pitch it. And then that person has to pitch it. And so whether you're pitching it to the agent for the director or the actors, the director, first question, what's it about? And then that agent has to pitch it to that director. And so it is a long chain of people who have to pitch this idea to other people and get them excited. It's not just you. And saying, just read the script, you'll love it. And I spent the first 10 years of my career going, oh, just read the script, you'll love it. And would get angry if they didn't get, like, it was just such full of self-sabotage.
Right.
But now I know I've got to give my agents, I've got to give my manager ammo, because they have to pitch this idea. And then that person has to pitch that idea. It is a chain. And the more communicable and exciting and interesting that idea is, the longer it goes to more and more people. And the marketing department is how do we market this movie? Here's the pitch. Well, that's how we market it. Like the pitch is the marketing. The idea is the marketing. So that's why IP is so valuable. People think we run out of ideas. Of course we haven't run out of ideas. It's just the marketing department knows it's just much easier to market an idea that everyone already knows.
The pre-awareness of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so us as original creators, our way to simulate an IP is an idea so distilled that just a few words market the movie itself.
And that's another strange concept that people maybe don't understand or comprehend or can't believe, maybe, is that if you have a strong enough concept or your logline is that good, the execution does not have to be pitch perfect. Would you agree?
It doesn't have to be pitch perfect. Yeah. Yeah. It just has to be good enough.
I mean, no one wants to hear that. No one wants to say, write a mediocre script. But if the execution isn't quite there, it's your first, second time around. Or if the concept is that good, someone might buy the script just for that concept to then get a quote unquote professional writer to write the version of that
they'll
project.
bring somebody else in. Yeah. I've had scripts that I've sold and they've completely and luckily I was hired to do the rewrite.
Gutted.
But they're like, we want to change this.
Okay.
We want to take it from a single lead to 3 leads. Same idea, same concept, but instead of a single lead, it's 3 leads.
Okay.
So that happens we love the idea. We're going to buy the idea from you, and then we're going to change it pretty heavily to what we think is going to be slightly more marketable. It's like that definitely happens.
Yeah. Well, Tom, I really appreciate your time and your wisdom with sharing with us today. And again, if people want to find out more about Tom's courses and sign up for his weekly screenwriting lesson newsletter, you can go to storyandplot.com/blacklisted. But Tom, this has been fantastic, and I'm a massive advocate for the courses, and I love returning to them. So thank you for that as well.
Thanks so much for having me, and thank you for the kind words. It thrills me to no end how much you enjoyed the courses.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, speak soon.